All right. So, um, I finally kid free for a little bit. My husband has them for an outing, so I'm taking advantage and getting videos out there to kind of get things up to date as far as share about our stillbirth back in 2022, which I vaguely shared on here, and then also sharing about my pregnancy after stillbirth, which I'm currently navigating. So, um, right before putting this video out, I shared my 23-week update and kind of a little bit of an unexpected hiccup that we ran into. So if you want to kind of get up to date on where things are at right now with my current pregnancy, then you can go back and watch that video now or after this. But this video is going to share um, I guess like a little disclaimer. This video is going to talk about stillbirth at 32 weeks, my personal experience, so trigger warnings there. I'll also share about um, my grief and how I kind of process that and somewhat continue to process that um, now, and but how I specifically process through some of that in 2022 to 2023. Um, I'll talk about like mental health and that kind of thing as well. And so everything that I share here is solely my personal experience and things that I have found to be helpful. If you find yourself in this situation, please, in the situation of dealing with any kind of mental illness, depression, anxiety, or you think you might be experiencing a loss and you're trying to figure out, is this what's happening? I definitely would recommend that you reach out to a professional for that. So, with that said, I'm going to share with you to begin with Gideon's story. So, um, toward, I want to say, at the beginning of 2022, we found out that we were pregnant um, with our son, Gideon. And we were very excited. We for sure had decided that we were going to try. This would be our fifth pregnancy. We have three girls who are living, and we had one miscarriage after our second baby that was in the first trimester. But it definitely affected me, in a great way. Um, what else? Okay, so with my pregnancy with Gideon, I was planning on having a home birth. So I went through a home birth midwife. Um, I received kind of like your standard care. There were no concerns of any high risk or anything like that. Um, and I want to say that I was going to have, at one point, I was going to meet with a high risk specialist for like, uh, just for a general checkup to make sure all was good. But that wasn't scheduled to happen until later in the pregnancy, which would have been after the point where I had my stillbirth. So, but as far as we could tell, everything in the pregnancy was going great. Um, I could have been better hydrated. My protein intake could have been better, but there wasn't really anything different that was affecting things that had been different in any of my other pregnancies. So there were really no concerns. All was good to go. And then a couple of days, so we were scheduled to go on vacation to North Carolina in August of 2022. And a few days before we left, I had a midwife appointment. It would have been like my 31 week checkup. And so I remember on my way to that appointment feeling like, he hasn't been as active as he usually is. And I was feeling kind of anxious about it. But up to this point, any kind of anxiety that I had, I kept connecting it to my miscarriage. And so it felt like, oh, I'm only feeling anxious because I'm scared, because of the miscarriage that I experienced, but this is a different pregnancy. And I just tried to like affirm myself through it rather than pay attention to like, well, why am I feeling that way? I just kind of brushed it off. But I remember on the way to the appointment calling my husband and just kind of crying and saying, like, I feel like when I get there's going to be no heartbeat and all of this. Obviously, in hindsight, there was probably stuff going on that I didn't realize. So we get to the appointment, and I didn't say anything to my midwife. I'm not sure why. Well, probably because I do know why. I was embarrassed about. I was just feeling embarrassed about like being anxious and felt like I was gonna, I didn't want to also speak it into being, even though I don't believe in that. But like there were just all these subconscious reasons for why I didn't say anything. And then when she took the Doppler to listen for baby's heartbeat, she finally found his heartbeat and everything sounded good. So I left there in happy tears, like, oh, good, it was just me and my anxiety and all of this. Everything's fine. So yeah, but that, as far as I can remember, that is the last day that I remember any like intentional movement from him. And I want to say that we left the very next day for vacation or like soon after. It wasn't very long. It may have even been that evening. So when we went on vacation, I felt movement, but again, it wasn't like what it had been. But because we had confirmed the heartbeat at my last appointment, I just thought, okay, the stuff that you hear of like, well, maybe their baby's running out of room or stuff. Again, in hindsight, I've learned differently. But I tried not to think too much about it because I felt like it would give in too much to anxiety and worry. And for what? When baby's fine in my head. So we went on vacation, and then I want to say the evening before we were going to leave, my sister-in-law said to me, hey, or earlier that day, she said to me, when he's really active, let me know because I want to feel him move. And I was like, well, good luck, because he hasn't been very active, but I'll try and like drink some caffeine or eat some candy, get some sugar in my system to see if he gets more active. So it was from that point on that I started like, okay, you know what? Nothing's happening. Like I drank quite a bit of caffeine. I drank, I was eating sugary stuff and all of that and nothing. So I had a lot of trouble sleeping that night. And, I was also I remember those last few days too, being super, super uncomfortable. Like I could not get comfortable in bed. I don't know. And it wasn't like typical. I hadn't had that in any of my other pregnancies, but it was like no matter what position I was in, I just could not get comfortable. Not sure if there was a connection there or what, but so I was, I had trouble sleeping because of that, but then also I was like, I haven't felt him move. Sometimes he'd be more active at night. So I was like, okay, at least move for me now, but he wasn't. And so by this time, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, and we're supposed to leave that morning to start driving back to Florida. And I was just like, I don't know, he hasn't been moving. I'm not sure if it's just me. I don't want to go all the way to the hospital and it just be my anxiety and everything be fine and then get a huge hospital bill because of that. Like I hate, again, in hindsight, I hate that some of those were even the thoughts that were crossing my mind at that point, but they were. And then I texted my midwife back then And I said, this is what's going on. And she kind of let me know my options of like, well, um, you could choose to wait till you get back, and I can have the ultrasound tech kind of come to your house and do a whole thing if you want. Um, or you could just go to the hospital. My recommendation would be for you to go to the hospital just to be on the safe side, but it's up to you. And I was like, okay. So I woke my husband up and I was like, we need to go to the hospital. Um, and that's kind of like the beginning of the the beginning of the grief. A part of me didn't want to go to the hospital because I felt like it, in my head, I was like, well, what if it's just my anxiety? But then another part of me was like, no, what if what I'm worried about actually comes to pass? And so we get there, they get me checked in, and the first thing they try to do is like get the fetal monitoring on me. And so they keep, they spend like a good, I'd say 30 minutes between like three different nurses really trying to like find the heartbeat. And at first they're like, "Oh, this baby's difficult," or "This baby just does not want us to hear them," and stuff. And then it was like they were getting quiet, like, maybe we should. I don't know. But they stopped. The comments kind of stopped. And they had me, okay, I want you to lay in this position. Okay, that's not working. Let's try this position. And then, they switched nurses and they couldn't find anything. So they said, you know what? Let's not even bother with this. Let's just go straight to the ultrasound. It'll tell us. And so, if you know anything of my background, I am a birth worker myself. I am familiar with some of this stuff and kind of what to expect. So there was like that part of me. I very much felt in that hospital bed like there were different parts of me, like compartmentalized. And in that moment, as everything was happening, I was just in my like, okay, this is what I should expect. This is what's going to happen next. Very practical, very logical. And if anything is wrong, the tech probably won't be able to tell me because the doctor needs to be the one to tell and all of that. So I was just, I think on the surface, calm, cool, and collected. But then there's this other part of me that's like, that was just barely holding it together. So we finally have the ultrasound done. And typically, especially given the circumstances, I think most techs would turn the sound on so that you could hear the heartbeat and you could have that reassurance. But she didn't do that. And so I was like, okay. And then when she was finished, I was like, and we have to wait for the doctor to tell us, right? You can't tell us anything. And she was like, no, I'm sorry. And she left. And then within a few minutes, the midwife who was on call came in and she was like, I am so sorry, but there's no heartbeat. And I lost it emotionally. My husband was with me, thankfully. And so he, I think he went into his compartmentalizing of like, okay, I'm here for her. I'm trying to be strong and all of that. But then also as a father, like trying to take in what's happened. And I remember I was just like in the bed like this, like crying hysterically and trying to calm myself because a midwife is trying to give me information or tell me, and I was like, it's okay. Please keep talking. I can hear you. I'm listening. And she was like, it's okay. And, so she said the little bit she needed to say. And she was like, then she kind of presented us with our options. So everything, once we found out there was no heartbeat, it was just kind of like, next steps. It was very like, this is what we do. So I think they were, they did their best to be gracious, and I did appreciate how they managed everything, but there's just something very clinical about a loss and having to move forward with the process. Like, there is no time to pause indefinitely. Like, that's really what you want. At least that's what I wanted. I wanted for all of life to just pause indefinitely and like rewind to when he was still alive and when everything was good and just stay there. But that wasn't it, nor is an option. So at that point, they said, we're going to give you some time to kind of think through your options. Options were that I could choose to be induced and give birth to him there. But some of the questions that we had were like, well, would we have to bury him here? Like, what does that look like? Because again, we were on vacation in North Carolina. Um, but they said we could run tests just to make sure that there's no infection, that you're okay, and you could travel back home. And then once you're there, go to the hospital, and they can do the whole process for you. So, the midwife leaves, the door closes, and my husband and I just start crying together. Like, I just couldn't wrap my head around any of it. Just rethinking so many things over those days that had happened. And and then we made phone calls. So he called his parents. His parents, we were all together, so they knew that we were in the hospital and everything like that. But I hadn't even had time to like tell my parents that we were in the hospital. So literally the call to my parents was, we lost a baby. I'm in the hospital. And, it was super early in the morning. So like they couldn't really understand me the first time. So I had to repeat myself. And then it was like, do we need to come over there? I would, we'd love to be with you, that kind of thing. And so it was just all like, okay, I don't know. I don't have the answer yet. But once we know more, then I'll let you know. So, which at that point, my parents were like, we're in the car, we're driving to North Carolina right now. They didn't, but I'm pretty sure they were very close. Because what parents wouldn't want to drop everything and just be with their kids? So, we asked my in-laws, like we asked the family who was with us not to tell our daughters so that we could have the chance to tell them ourselves in person. And I think that was one of the more devastating things too, of like, how are we going to tell them? Because they were so excited. They were very involved. Like, we'd been watching home birth videos and just so many things to prepare. They went to every appointment with me, very engaged, helped with the Doppler, helped with the ultrasound. Like, so it was going to be a lot, a lot for all of us, but for them as kids, it was going to hit them differently. And ultimately, we decided that we would wait. After we got the results of all my blood work and everything, everything looked fine. So we decided to wait until we got back to Florida to start the process. It was already, by the time I left the hospital, it was already about like 2 p.m. So I didn't feel comfortable trying to make the 8 or so hour drive back home. So I decided, like, let's just stay, because our girls also weren't ready to leave. They were like, no, we want more family time. So I thought, well, in lieu of this bad news, like, let's give them a little more family time so that they can be loved on and I can have, I don't know, we could have just a chance to kind of reset and try leaving again the next morning, which is what we did. That time frame, those 24 hours, I would say, was definitely surreal for me. It was hard to make eye contact with anyone in my family. It was hard to exist. Like I would just remember like being on the couch in the living room with my laptop and just like typing, trying to figure out how I was going to put an update on social media or something, like, which wasn't necessary, but also it was like something that I could do to distract myself and be productive. But it was just like I was just disassociating as much as I could and still in shock. Like I just couldn't wrap my head around everything. When we got back from the hospital, we asked our girls to come into our bedroom and we sat them down and we explained where we had been and shared with them that I had passed away. And the oldest two, who were 10 and 8 at the time, were, devastated. They just were so sad. My oldest was old enough to be aware of our miscarriage, so we already knew it was going to affect her much more because she had already, she was greatly affected even as a 5-year-old by that loss. So she was very angry about it and wasn't afraid to express it. So this time it was just like, they just couldn't believe it. My youngest didn't really understand. And after we told her, she was like, "Can I go watch my TV show now?" Which brought a little bit of, light humor into a very difficult situation. So we were like, "Go ahead, go watch, let's allow her to be in her innocence while she can." She was about 4. And yeah, so then, like I said, I just went about the day kind of disengaged and just trying to exist. We left the following morning, and my midwife kind of helped us prepare for a plan when we got back, like, to talk through what hospital we would want to go to and all of that, and making arrangements for an induction. So on our way back, we made arrangements with my parents to meet us there at our apartment and take the girls, literally move their suitcases from one vehicle to another so that they could watch them while we went through the process of the induction and all of that. And so the induction was scheduled. I think my days honestly are all mixed up, but we got back, I want to say like a Thursday or Friday evening, and she had scheduled the induction, or, had called the hospital for my induction, and they were supposed to call me the following day with like what time to show up. And then when they finally called me, they were like, "We have no space available." So then it's like, okay. So they were like, "We'll call you again tomorrow." And so it was like, well, how long is this whole process going to take? So I told my midwife kind of what they told me. And she was so great. She like called like every hospital in the area, and finally found a spot that we could go to that very night. So we packed everything up and went to a local hospital and got checked in, all of that. slept for a little bit, and then they told me, we would start the induction process the next morning. But to do another ultrasound just to confirm that, the heartbeat for sure wasn't um, before they could do the induction, because this wasn't too long after the change in the Roe v. Wade as well. So they had to like do extra precautions. They ran a second ultrasound too at the previous hospital with another provider again because of that. And so yeah, um, I actually asked for my midwife to publicly share the birth, Gideon stillbirth, because I feel like more examples of how that can go and be a beautiful thing should be shared. Beautiful for what it's worth. And so her YouTube is Natural Design Midwifery, and so you can find his birth video on there. But thankfully, under all the circumstances, what I really didn't want was to end up in a C-section on top of I didn't want more physical trauma to my body on top of the mental and emotional trauma of the loss. So I was worried about that with the induction. But thankfully the best case scenario happened, which is where they just did, I can't remember if they did I believe they did cytotech, yes. They did a few tablets of that, and then my body just took over, and so I didn't have to keep taking that. And then I birthed him, and so the night before when my parents were over and we were talking through it, I just remember crying to my parents, what if I'm disgusted by what he looks like? What if what if I don't want to hold him? I was just so nervous about what the physical, tactile, sensory experience was going to be for me. And, my mom was very reassuring, no, that's not going to be the case. Of course you love him and stuff. And even if that is, it'll be okay and all of that. And so once he was finally born, there were definitely things visually and as far as sensory related with touch and stuff that we had to figure out a way to mentally navigate through, because it was just such a traumatic thing to see. And based on his appearance, it seemed that he had actually passed probably sooner than what we even realized. So he had been gone for a little bit. And because of that, the baby, he didn't come out with your typical baby skin and everything like that. This is part of those disclaimers or trigger warnings. In all my births, except for my first one because I wasn't educated, but after I, hired a doula and started educating myself and getting into the birth field, I've always been I don't want hands-on. I want people, I just want my baby put on my chest. I don't want them rubbed a lot. I just, don't take them away from me, leave them on me. But with him, his skin was just so fragile that I was worried about more damage being caused to it if I kept him on me for too long, skin to skin. So I did have them go ahead and wrap him kind of within that first minute or so of him being out. And the nurses were all amazing, super helpful and discreet and, gracious and giving us time. They wrapped him up and gave him back to me, and I was able to hold him, and there were just just a lot of things that there was like, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of compartmentalizing. So there was this part of me, the birth professional part of me was just like learning so much that I didn't know. And so on one side, I was like, this is going to be so helpful if I ever have to support someone through this in the future, God forbid. And also feeling like I was not equipped for this as a birth worker if I had to face something like this up until that point. And then there was another piece of me that was like, is this really happening? Like, still just in that shock mode. Um, I wasn't sure up until after the first 24 hours of him being out whether or not I would want family to visit us. I knew that, we knew that we were going to let our girls come and decide for themselves if they wanted to hold him or see him or anything like that. And my parents, my parents brought them over, and that's in the video as well, like each of them holding him. Some held him just for a few seconds or a minute, and some held him much more often. And and then after that, I was like, okay, I think I was feeling open to having family visit. And so the way we kind of manage that, if you're watching and kind of like, if you know that you're about to navigate the situation and trying to decide how you would navigate that, is I chose to have him. First, I wrapped him in multiple layers because since he wasn't living, there was a lot of fluid leaking out of him. And so we were constantly having to change the blankets that were on him. And I didn't want anyone who would come and choose to hold him to like experience any of that. And so like he probably had like 10 blankets on him. The other thing is that, he had no muscle tone or anything, so his jaw just hung open. And so we did, kind of wrap it to where his mouth was closed. And then I had him in the bassinet. It was a special bassinet with like cooling stuff that the hospital had, and had him kind of in the back corner so that when people came in, they didn't see him, but they were able to kind of greet us first. And then I would say, if you want to see him, he's over there and you're welcome to hold him. And some people did, some people didn't. I was kind of indifferent to either one, but, it's something that, like, in hindsight, I am thankful, because those are, as hard as it is that other people had to see him in that way or chose to see him in that way, like, I'm not the only one who has to remember him in that way. It's not something I carry by myself, and it is something that if I needed to like talk about it, especially with other women in particular in my family, like I can. Um, uh, the evening too that he was born, we were offered for a volunteer photographer to come and do pictures of him if we wanted. And we did choose to do that. And so, they had a little outfit for him and all the things, and they gave him a little teddy bear. And that was like one of the first moments where it was like, it felt like he came to life, because he was like clothed and had a teddy bear in his arm, and just a very emotional moment and meaningful. And so I was so looking forward to those pictures. We were told that they were going to be edited, but the way that it was explained was that they would be edited in a way that it just kind of smooths away some of the difficult things to see. When I got the pictures, a little bit later, I was very upset because like he looked nothing like what he actually looked like. And actually, when the organization was very kind, and the photographer, because she had backups and stuff, she was able to remove a lot of the edits for us, which is unusual, because they don't usually save the pictures once they've given them to the family. But because of the timing and when we reached out, she was able to. But it definitely caught them by surprise that I basically was like, I don't want any edits to them. And I was surprised too. The challenge with the pictures was that in my mind, I captured him looking one specific way. And so any changes to that, it was really difficult for me to accept, because it felt like if I accepted the changes, then I was denying the beauty of the way that he came out. And as difficult as it was to look at him the way that he came out, that's how I knew him and that's how I fell in love with him. So, um, so I wanted the images as he was. And if you go to my Instagram account, Purposely Entrusted Motherhood, you'll see like the images, the ones that they updated for me and were able to get. So the ones that I've shared of him are the ones that I was happy about, and thankful that they were able to do for me. And yeah, we stayed in the hospital for about 3 days. He stayed in the room with us the whole time. On our final day, like, they kept saying you can have as much time as you want, but I knew that we had to leave. If we didn't leave, I was never going to leave. And so when we did finally decide to leave, I requested for them to take him out first, because I didn't want it to be like we were leaving him, even though we were leaving him. And so, that's also in part of the video too, of the nurse removing him from the room and then us leaving. And, my husband pulled the car around. I got in the car, and then it was just like we just headed. It was just so surreal, because then it got into the super, some of it started in the hospital, but it was just like, again, the clinical stuff of things have to move forward. So like, where do you want the body taken to? Where do you, what are your funeral arrangements? Are you going to cremate? Are you going to bury this? Where are you going to bury them? All like this stuff that I did not have. I felt like I didn't have the capacity to do. Somehow, by God's grace, like, he made the capacity available to us to get it, but it was just like, I shouldn't be having to do this right now. Like, this is ridiculous. We went to one funeral home, which is a funeral home that ended up, getting his body and all of that for us and doing the funeral for us. But they gave us a tour of the funeral grounds. And right before, they had said like, oh, we were able to get it discounted, so it's only going to be like 300 something. And so it was like, praise God, from thousands of dollars for 300, that's amazing. We can make that work. And then when they gave us a tour, they were like, and this plot of land, this amount and this amount. And it was just like, and you kind of see the nicer ones, and then you go down to like the cheaper ones, or on the corner where cars can drive over it. Like, it was just very, like, I shut down after that, because we saw that and I was like, okay, I think I want this area. And then when we went to the room, she was like, so I understand he got this part discounted for you for this amount, and so now all it would be this amount based on what you want. And I was like, oh, it's additional. And suddenly it changed. Thankfully, I I requested for my aunt to come with us um, because I needed someone else in the room to kind of help navigate some of that. And she and I have very similar, like, we process things very similar and preferences. So I felt like she would think about things that in my normal state of mind I would have thought of. And so she was there. But I like, once this lady started talking numbers to me that I wasn't expecting and telling me that I needed to pay that right that day and all this, I was like, what? What in the world? I was so mad. I was so angry. And it was like this close to coming out. I'm not one to allow my anger to rise to the surface like every time I get upset. I feel, I think it would be fair. Most people would say that I'm a pretty calm, cool, and collected person. But if it gets me heated, Um, so that was very upsetting. She left the room to give us some time to talk, and I just started crying. I was like, I couldn't believe it because at that point I felt like, well, number one, we didn't have the money. And number two, I felt like, cremation had been mentioned at one point or a couple of times. And I was just like, I don't know that I want to have him cremated. Like, I've in the past have cremate me, don't spend all that money. But then actually having to face this in person, I just couldn't bear the thought of like doing more damage to his body than his body had already experienced. Um, And so I just like, I don't want to have him cremated. But when we left there, I just felt like I just had to settle for that. And so on the drive home, I was talking to my husband and I was just like, I guess if that's what we have to do, then it's what we have to do, but it's not what I want. And he was like, no, we're not going to do that. Um, he was like, let me just make some phone calls, call the church, everything. And I just finally was like, okay, here is what I want. I want, I want him to be buried. I want it to be somewhere, I want it to be that we don't go into a bunch of debt over this. I don't even feel like we should have to pay for this. And I wanted to, I was like, I want there to be a little service. I want family there. I don't know who all, but I know I want family there. And then I don't know if I want to do like refreshments afterward or something, but like that's just what I want. So the rest is on you. And I kind of handed it over to him. And thankfully he managed it and took care of everything. I think the last little detail I had to help with was choosing the songs for the service. But in the end, we were able to have him buried at our church cemetery since we're members there. For a much more affordable price. And I did a social media post kind of updating friends and family of like, here's where we're at. And, if you're able and can contribute financially, it would really help us a lot. And so within, less than 24 hours, we had all the money raised to cover the funeral costs and things like that, which was just such a gift. We ended up having his funeral on the day that we were scheduled to have his baby shower, which was bittersweet. And it was a beautiful service. That there's a video of it here on. Um, we had family from every side come and friends as well, people from the church who came. And yeah, like that's pretty much in a consolidated way his story and how everything went. I'm going to have to do a part 2 because I try not to let my videos go more than 30 minutes, but this one has. So I'm going to do a part 2 of, the actual navigating the grief in that year after the funeral, after all the people went away, and life kind of kept going.